Hi, my name is Elizabeth Sullivan. I'm a wellness coach for pre-professional dancers in training, and some of you may have attended some of my talks in the past at your school. Of course, this is a very different format for me, one that is new given our current situation in the world. So welcome to my talk today, which is called Strategies for Coping with the New Normal, where I'm going to be sharing some ideas for you to try on to help you cope with the situation that you're in, with the social distancing and the isolation, and unfortunately the fact that you are no longer in a ballet studio but doing everything at home on your own. So this is a new everything for everyone. I keep saying that there's really no playbook for a pandemic, and that is definitely true. So we're all doing the best we can, and I hope that some of the strategies I share with you today you'll find helpful. So the main concept that I want to talk to you about right now is called mental flexibility. Mental flexibility is a skill, it's a psychological skill that you can work on and develop and strengthen. Just like many of the other mental fitness skills that I have shared with, maybe with you, but certainly with other pre-professional dancers all around the country in the past. Psychological skills are skills that you can build up in your mind. You can create a strength in the way that you think about things and the way that you approach problems that you're having to support you in your dancing. So it's not just about your body and having your body do what you need it to do, but having your mind be very connected and supportive of what it is you're trying to do in the ballet studio with your technique. So mental flexibility. One of the easiest ways to describe it is what it is not. Mental rigidity, you can think of someone who has difficulty adapting to unexpected situations, someone who has expectations that when they're not met, they really have a difficult time adjusting to those expectations. And you may know someone who you would consider mentally rigid. I would say that it's somewhat in the DNA of a lot of dancers to be a little bit mentally rigid. And I'm including myself in that, so I'm not saying that as a criticism in any way. The nature of dance training, the fact that it's very regularized, it's very routine-based, it's very repetitive. This type of training appeals to a certain kind of personality, a personality that tends to be in its nature a bit more rigid, that likes things done the same way all the time. You may know someone, or you may be rigid in the ways that you warm up for class every day, in the food that you eat every day, in the clothes that you choose to wear, or the shoes or the leotards, right? So we get into routines and we like them that way, and that sometimes can be understood as a type of rigidity. The good news, though, is that being a dancer means that you're also inherently mentally flexible in many ways. How can I say that based on what I just said? Well, for most people, when they go into the ballet studio every day, they don't know what's coming at them. The combinations will be different. The choreography that they're asked to do from one day to the next can be completely different. And you are supposed to sort of just jump in, get on your feet, and just go for it, right? Even though you don't know what the teacher necessarily is asking of you. And that requires a lot of flexible thinking, right? If you were truly mentally rigid, you would not be able to be very successful in a dance studio. So it's important to recognize that even though we may, each of us, or you may each have some natural rigidity in the way that you think about your work, in the way that you act in the studio, or even in your life, there's also an inherent flexibility in the way that your mind works, because you wouldn't be able to be a very successful dancer without it. So this concept of mental flexibility is something that you can build on, rather than thinking that you have to create it out of nothing, which you don't. I'm going to give you an example, which I think demonstrates the difference between mental rigidity and flexibility in a way that's very easy to see. So I want you to imagine that two dancers walk into a subway car in some major city, Washington, New York, San Francisco, and they both stand in the middle of the car away from the poles. One of the dancers crosses his arms over his chest and kind of plants his feet on the ground and locks his knees. The dancer standing next to him, she keeps her arms down by her side, and she sort of has relaxed knees. Now, if that subway car just goes straight ahead, makes no detours, makes no sudden stops. Both of those dancers are going to be fine because their expectation is that it's going to be a smooth ride. If, as often happens in New York, the subway conductor slams on the brakes for some reason, or the subway car veers in the tunnel as it's moving very quickly, the dancer who has his arms locked across his chest and his knees locked is going to tip over. He's gonna really be shaken from his stance, right? Because he's not in a position to deal with anything unexpected. Whereas the dancer who has her hands down by her side and her knees are relaxed, when she gets that sudden impact, she's going to be able to absorb it better in her body, right? She's going to be able to put her arms out to the side maybe and kind of grab onto something or catch her balance in a different way. So I want you to keep that idea in your mind of those two dancers and how, even though we're talking about physical flexibility and rigidity in that particular instance, I want you to keep that in mind as you think about your mind, because we can react rigidly to circumstances that surprise us or catch us off guard, or we can decide to react flexibly. And it is our choice. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So how do you cultivate that flexibility so that you can be better equipped to handle the kinds of situations that, like we find ourselves in today, a situation of many unknown variables, no certain timeline for what it is that we're dealing with in terms of being back to our normal lives. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you now so that you have something to look at. Strategies for coping with the new normal. This is the name of my talk. And mental flexibility. So mental flexibility, just based on some of the examples I've given you already, allows you to adapt to new circumstances. It doesn't have to be fast necessarily, but it does help you to adapt. It also allows you to expect the unexpected. Now, it's hard to expect the unexpected, but I think you know what I mean here. Again, if you think about those dancers in the subway, the one who is more flexibly standing in her stature is able to expect in a better way what she can't expect, right? And in this particular circumstance, it can be helpful to think about, obviously we've got a lot of unexpected things happening these days, and how can we adjust and adapt to that? The other thing is that when you think about being a live performer on stage, there are always so many unexpected things that can happen, right? So I'm sure a lot of you have had experience with this already, where, all of a sudden there's a slippery patch on the stage that you weren't anticipating. The music that they play is the wrong music sometimes if you're using recorded music. So these things happen in the life of a live performer, and we want to be ready for them, right? Expect the unexpected. That requires having a state of mind, a mindset that isn't completely fixed on one set of expectations. It allows you to be more resilient in the face of challenges, which is definitely true for performers. And in this particular case, allowing you to sort of rise up and deal with what you have to meet every day. Helps you recover quickly when you're facing different odds. And being mentally flexible also allows you to see more than one side of a situation. Certainly in the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, all the dancers that I spoke to in my coaching practice were not doing well. They were dealing with a lot of really big feelings, right? Disappointment at not being able to dance, a lot of frustration with having to figure out how to do this at home in spaces that weren't adequate for them, that weren't even safe in some situations. Many performances were canceled, competitions were canceled, things that people had been preparing for months, right? Things they'd been working up to. So initially, there was a lot of negativity responding to the lockdowns and the coronavirus, which is natural in that particular situation, right? But being mentally flexible has allowed, and practicing mental flexibility in my coaching practice with me has allowed a lot of these dancers to kind of turn around the way that they're looking at the situation. And now they're able to see that they can carve out some opportunities for themselves despite the sort of challenge of this particular situation, right? So if you stay in that rigid mindset, it's very hard to see other sides of your situation, particularly the situation that we're in, because there are a lot of negatives. But if you can think flexibly, you can start to see other ways of looking at your situation, and some of them may even be positive and have some opportunities associated with them, which we'll talk about a little bit. So I want to share two examples of dancers with you who I have coached, where they went from a rigid mindset to a more flexible mindset and were able to create an opportunity for themselves. So the first one is a dancer named Claire, who I worked with for many years. She was dancing at a very prestigious school in New York City. And when she graduated, she went on to a company contract in the Midwest. She was in the corps de ballet. She spent a year there and had a really positive experience. But I remember when she was about halfway through her time there, we had a session, and she said to me, I'm really much too tall for this company. I tower over everybody, including the principals, and I don't think I have a future here, a long-term future. And so she was thinking about getting prepared to do auditions for companies where her body type and her height would be a better fit. And so I helped her prepare for that, and she did a great round of auditions, and she received an offer from her dream company, really, but it was for the trainee program. Now, they really liked her, but they didn't have any spots in their second company. And so they said, you would have to come and be a trainee for a year, maybe even two, until a spot opens up in the second company. So Claire initially was not really sure what to think of this. Obviously, the initial reaction was, I don't want to go back to being a student. I don't want to be back in a studio on a schedule that isn't a professional schedule. I'm going to lose all of my performing opportunities. I'm not going to be paid, right? I'm going to be paying tuition instead of being paid as I am now. So I think it's pretty easy to see what a lot of the negatives would have been for her in terms of accepting a trainee position after being in the corps de ballet. But we also spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, how can we think about this in a different way? Are there some positives? Is there another way to look at this situation that could be seen as an opportunity? And, she started thinking about, well, this is my dream company. I am a better fit for them in terms of my body and my height and my style of dancing. Maybe it would be worth it to spend some time in the school, have them really get to know me, have them understand my work ethic, right? And maybe it would be worth it. Well, sure enough, she did end up having to do 2 years as a trainee, but sure enough, she was taken into the second company as soon as the spot opened up. And the artistic director was very effusive about and very vocal with telling her how much how much they valued her as a dancer and how happy they were to be able to give her a contract. Because by the time they hired her, he was saying he really felt like he knew her work ethic. He knew that she would be a great addition to the group of second company dancers. And he was really pleased to be able to give her the first available contract, right? So if Claire hadn't been able to turn that situation around and evaluate it from a different point of view, use that mental flexibility, she would have missed out on what has turned out to be a great opportunity for her. The second example I want to share with you is with a dancer named Julia, who dances with the English National Ballet. She and I have been coaching together for many years. Last winter, she was chosen by the company dancers to be one of 6 competing dancers from the company for the Emerging Dancer competition. Now, there were 3 women and 3 men. They're each paired up to do a full pas de deux variations in coda and then a contemporary piece. And Julia considers herself to be a lyrical dancer, a Giselle, a white swan, maybe an aurora, but she doesn't consider herself to be a very flashy dancer or a trickster or anything like that. So she was beyond disappointed when she was given the Flames of Paris pas de deux for the competition. I remember our first few calls after she was assigned that particular piece of choreography, and she was really upset and she was almost angry. And I remember her saying, this is going to be a disaster. I am not a showy dancer. I am not, a trickster. Why would they have given me this piece? It doesn't make any sense. I can't win, but I can't, not only that, I don't think I'll do well. So of course, as her coach and mentor, I had to, help her see another side of the situation. So I helped her kind of turn it around and see it through a more flexible point of view. And what she ended up sort of adopting rather, as her new mindset was, this is an opportunity for me to explore a part of my artistic personality that I normally wouldn't have the opportunity to explore, because people don't look at me and think of me as a flashy kind of trickster ballerina, right? That's not what they see. So she decided she was going to make as her main goals to master the choreography as much as possible, to add in a lot of that kind of flair and kind of showiness that was necessary, as part of that choreography. And she really wanted to connect with the audience. Those were her three main goals. That she wanted to have fun and have the audience have fun watching her, because it's that kind of a piece. And I ended up watching the competition live streaming on my phone in the aisles of Whole Foods, because of course in London it was evening and in New York City it was afternoon. And it was really exciting to be in the aisles of the grocery store watching her dance on stage like a true bravura kind of Russian style dancer. She did beautifully. She was very showy. She was really fun. She had great facial expression. And the audience really just ate it up. And in the end, she did end up winning, actually, the competition. She was chosen as the emerging dancer for that year. And it was interesting because the panel of judges, they interviewed some of them during the intermission. Now, Julia did not have a spotless, perfect performance. Her shoe broke, her standing leg shoe broke during the variation. And so her final fouettes were, it was a bit of a save to get through. But it didn't matter. And one of the judges actually said, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for a dancer who really connects with the audience and has a lot of joy on stage. And Julia did. And it really came down to, in the end, the fact that she was able to shift the way she was thinking about the piece, to shift her mindset around what it was that she was doing in this particular piece, right? So those are just two examples to give you a sense of, a more concrete sense of what I'm talking about, rigidity versus flexibility. So there are some ways that you can cultivate mental flexibility. Here are the tips, right? The first one is to really narrow your focus to what you can control. In the situation for Julia, she couldn't change the choreography that she was going to have to perform in front of a live audience on stage, right? And compete with that choreography. That was what she was given, and that was what she had to focus on. In our current situation with the isolation and the coronavirus, there are a lot of things outside of our control, and that is incredibly frustrating. It's maddening, and it can be very upsetting. But if you focus on the things that are within your control, it's going to help you be more emotionally stable, and it's going to help you be able to cultivate some of this flexibility. So for example, right now you are in charge of what time you wake up in the morning, what time you go to bed at night, what things you're eating and choosing not to eat, how you're approaching your classwork every day, when you choose to do your schoolwork, what kind of mindset you want to have while you're doing your schoolwork. These are all things that you actually are in control of, and so it's important to keep your focus there. This is a big one. In part, again, because of the personality type that is drawn to dance. You are all, not all of you, but many of you will be type A personalities, people who like planning, people who like order in your world, right? The kinds of people who can come and take a bar every single day where everything is in roughly the same order, right? So it's a type of personality. So it's going to be really challenging for you right now to not be able to plan ahead, right? We don't know what's happening in the summer yet. We don't know if studios will be open or not. We don't know if schools will be open in the fall. We just don't have answers to these questions, right? And that is again, it's upsetting and it's frustrating, but it's important to know and recognize whether or not this is something that you are doing on a daily basis. Are you looking to try to understand what your summer is going to look like? Are you trying to understand what your fall is going to look like? And if you're doing that, is it helping you? Is it making you feel more motivated to get to the bar? Is it helping you feel more excited about working on things in your Zoom classes? Or is it making you upset? Is it frustrating you? Is it bringing you down? Is it attacking your sense of motivation? So for each of you, it's a very independent situation. You need to evaluate it for yourself. If thinking towards the summer as a motivator, I'm going to be ready for that summer program really works for you, then great. I mean, think about it. There's no problem. But if like a lot of people, thinking about the summer creates anxiety, creates frustration, creates fear of things not turning out the way you want them to, then really try to question that particular set of thinking. You just want to kind of put a little emotional distance between those types of thoughts and yourself, right? Because it's out of your control. And until we have more information, there's really not much that you or I or anyone else can do about it. The next thing is to reevaluate your to-do list. You probably have a pretty big to-do list. But in this particular scenario, there are fewer things you need to do than you maybe used to do. And I think it's time to kind of get back to the basics, get down to the essentials that you actually have to do every single day in order to close your eyes at night and be able to have a good night's sleep, right? To feel accomplished at the end of the day. Some things that maybe you used to do, you don't really need to do anymore. Maybe you haven't evaluated them properly to determine that maybe they're not necessary. Let me be more specific. Some of my dancers are trying to match the same number of hours at home that they used to do in the studio in terms of their dancing. This is not realistic for most people. And not necessary either. Even my professional dancers have sort of accepted the fact that quality is what you want over quantity, and that doing one solid class a day and then doing some kind of conditioning, some kind of cardio, getting outside every day for some fresh air, making sure that they connect with people that they love, that they can't see anymore. That kind of a day is ultimately more satisfying and makes them feel better than trying to do 2 or 3 or 4 classes a day. So, that old way of thinking what has to get done every day, you can examine that and you can make some new decisions on what really is going to work for you and what doesn't work. In order to cultivate mental flexibility, it's going to be important for you to take some time to deal with your feelings when they come up. This is not a good time for repressing your feelings. It's not a good time for pushing them to the side and pretending that they don't exist. We need to make time. You need to make time to, deal with what's coming up, and recognizing that, feeling upset or angry or frustrated by the situation or even fearful is completely normal. It's completely normal. You want to go ahead and process those so that you can come out on the other side and start to cultivate some more positive, productive feelings. That is not easy to do. It's a big call to action, but I know that and I know that you are people who are in the studio normally. You deal with high pressure situations all the time. You are always processing and managing your feelings so that you can do good work in the studio. And so I'm asking you to do more of the same. It's just maybe on a heightened level because, of the situation that we're in. You can adapt some centering or calming strategies. This is a really good idea if you're finding that you can't process your feelings, that your feelings are too heightened, that you're too upset to really calm down enough to get into the right frame of mind to do your schoolwork and your dance work every day, then I strongly encourage you to start thinking about some solutions to help you calm down and help you feel more centered. I've gone back to practicing yoga every morning, which is something I didn't haven't done in many years. I mean, 4 or 5 years, I haven't done that. But I found that I need now that morning kind of connection between my body and my mind so that I can not start the day with the news, right? Not start the day with fear and statistics and worry, because even though I need to know what's going on in the world, I don't need to start my day in that frame of mind, because it means that I can't have a day that for me is filled with a sense of purpose, right? And a lot of my dancers are finding that too. It's important to start your day in a way that you feel calm and you feel centered and you feel like you can, you know, get started on your own footing, if that makes sense, rather than the world coming in at you right away first thing and taking over your mindset. Some calming or centering strategies, if you don't have any, or you know you are looking for suggestions, daily journaling is a really good one. You can start with what's called a brain dump, where the first thing in the morning you just open up a notebook and just kind of stream of consciousness, write what it is that you're thinking of. Maybe you are having anxious thoughts first thing in the morning and you just want to get them out of your head and get them onto a piece of paper. You can try journaling in the evening. The WWW list, which is the what went well list. We know from studies in psychology and positive psychology that when people focus on what's going well in their lives, even at a very small level, right, a really in minute detail, that they actually are happier. So they're cultivating gratitude on a daily basis. So you may find it a bit of a struggle to figure out what's going well in your days initially, but once you get the habit of it, it'll be easier, and you'll be able to say at the end of the day, oh, here are 2 or 3 things that actually went well today that I'm happy about. And the last type of journaling that I'll share with you is something called morning pages by Julia Cameron. You can Google her. And she has a type of journaling where she wakes up first thing in the morning, and before she does anything else, like lying in bed with a notebook, she does a stream of consciousness. Just everything that comes into her head, she just writes it down. And I think she recommends doing it for something like 20 or 25 minutes. So you can find a strategy that works best for you. And like all things in the mental fitness department, I'm a strong advocate for practicing, right? Try some things on, just experiment. And you will know through trial and error and experimentation which type of calming exercise or which type of journaling works the best for you. There's no better way to journal. You try a few things and find what works for you. Mindful breathing is something that you can investigate at this time. There are some apps for your phone. There's one called Headspace. There's one called Calm. If you do a little searching around in the App Store, you'll find all kinds of things. Basically, mindful breathing, as any of you who have been in one of my talks knows, is just allowing your mind to be more connected to your body so that your mind isn't off wandering around having all kinds of anxious thoughts. And so even something as simple as breathing in for 3 counts and breathing out for 3 counts and breathing in for 3 counts and breathing out for 3 counts, that's enough sometimes, because your brain is focused on counting and it's focused on the sensation of breathing. Maybe that doing that for 15 counts is all you need, just to bring yourself back to yourself, right? So that you're not feeling overwhelmed or anxious. Practicing self-compassion. This is hard. It's hard for dancers in particular who you always feel like you should be hard on yourselves in order to create that work ethic or that sense of motivation that's going to kind of propel you ahead of everyone else. But in this particular time, it's very important to practice self-compassion, especially on days where, your bar may not go as well as you wanted it to, or days where you try something in point shoes that you haven't done in a while and you don't feel strong anymore. You just have to step back and tell yourself that, like, it's okay. Okay. It's okay. It will be okay. Everything will be fine in the end. I just need to take a minute, right? I need to take a minute away from this class and maybe go leave the room, get a drink of water, do some mindful breathing, and come back to it. Meditation, for those of you who haven't, this is another great tool, obviously, for calming the mind, centering the body, which you can try. I mentioned practicing yoga in the morning these days, which is helping me. If you Google the word sun salutation, you will get one of the foundation movements for a vinyasa practice in yoga. The sun salutation is a really simple, for you would be a very simple move to practice. And I do 3 or 4 of those in the morning. And you could do that and stop there. And during the sun salutations, you can actually set some intentions for the day if you want, because yoga movement is often kind of meditation in movement, that a lot of people think about yoga that way. So that might be something that could help you start your day and feel more centered, or even end your day if you want something to kind of wind down with at the end of the day, something to investigate. Okay, so I've put Zoom here. You may be using a different platform for your classes, but Zoom, Microsoft, whatever you're on. I'm going to share a few tips with you for thinking how to think in a mentally flexible way about these online classes. Of course, a rigid way of thinking about them is that they're no good, right? It's nothing like being in a studio. I can't get anything out of it. Some dancers are saying things like, this is just damage control. All I'm doing is trying to just keep myself from going backwards. Those things can be true if that's how you look at them, right? But a more flexible way to look at it, of course, is that this is also an opportunity, right? It's not the opportunity you may have asked for. It's not the opportunity you were looking for, but we are here in this situation. And the fact that, we can even have things like Zoom classes where you can continue to train to some degree is really quite amazing. If this kind of pandemic had happened when I was in training, there wouldn't have been anything like this at all. We would have been maybe mailing videotapes across the country from teacher to student, but it would have been very difficult to continue the training. So it's important to, again, try to see the other side of the situation. There are a lot of positives about the online classes. You may find, if your motivation is waxing and waning, it's coming and going, that you could benefit from having a statement of purpose. A statement of purpose is basically answering a few questions for yourself, which is, 1, why do this class every day? Why come and do this bar? Why is it important that I continue my training even though the format is so different from, what I'm normally doing in the studio? If you can answer these questions for yourself, then write them down on a piece of paper and post them somewhere. Stick it to the wall where you have your bar, or near the counter that you're holding onto for your bar work. Put it on your bathroom mirror. It's important to check in regularly with your statement of purpose, because this is the statement which is going to answer the question, why am I doing this, when it's so different from, what I conceive of as a class. Just as you would set goals for yourself before you take class in a studio, it's important to continue to set goals for yourself before your virtual classes. You want to have something to focus on. The first point that I showed you on the slide for cultivating mental flexibility was to narrow your focus to the things you can control. And that's still true of classes. You don't want to show up for your class in the morning thinking, well, I really hope I get a correction or some feedback today, because otherwise I have no idea what to focus on. You all have many corrections that are living around and, hanging out in your brains. And it's important to decide what it is that you can focus on before you get to the bar every morning. Not only that, you want to be thinking about things that you can actually focus on with the current restrictions that you have, right? So if you were really working on landing your double tour before the lockdown, that is no longer going to be your main concern, right? And ladies, if you were working on mastering fouettes or grand allegro, you're going to have to shift your goals at this point to something else, right? And the good news is that there are a lot of basic foundations in dance technique that you can work on even in the current circumstances. So you just want to get very clear with yourself about what is realistic and what can I work on at this point. One of the positives in this situation I'll share with you, a number of my younger dancers who are young and maybe not fully confident in themselves yet, have noted that the limited amount of time that people are looking at them is actually really helping them come out of their shells. So isn't that interesting? And it's not the teacher so much, it's that they have previously been, you know, a little upset by their peers, right? My peers are watching me all the time. I think they're judging me. One of the things I do in my work often with young dancers is help them realize that it's very rare that other dancers are really spending that much time looking at you, right? Most dancers are pretty much focused on themselves because they need to be in order to do well. However, that sense of that pressure can be there, right? And so now with these teeny tiny screens where all that you can see is really your teacher and all that everybody else is really looking at is that teacher, that the number of people actually focusing in on you in every class is very small. And for some dancers, this is an opportunity for them to try to build their sense of confidence, try to work more on their expressiveness and their facial expressions, their artistry, because they feel less, they just feel less judged. They're not being watched as much. So that's just one example of a positive way of looking at these online classes. You can certainly come up with your own, I'm sure, whether it's being able to wear some warm-ups or not having to wear your uniform or whatever. It's important to maybe create a list of those things so that you can remind yourself, even in the midst of all of these things that don't work very well for me, these are some positives that I can focus on. It's more important than ever to engage in smart work. If you've read my newsletters and you've heard my talks, I'm always trying to differentiate between smart work and hard work. All dancers work hard. That's kind of part of the makeup of a dancer. But we also want to work intelligently, right? Which means strategizing about the kinds of things that you can focus on now that you're working at home. So again, it wouldn't be necessarily a very smart idea to really start pushing the allegro, even as you may be desperate for some cardio, right? Smart work says you don't want to be jumping in your home unless you happen to have a sprung floor in your living room. That would be amazing. But if you don't, you know, you want to think about ways to build your cardio, to keep up the strength in your legs and feet and glutes without having to jump on that surface. So that may mean jumping on a trampoline. It may mean, you know, if there's a cork track in your neighborhood that you can get on with practicing social distancing, it may mean getting out on that track and doing some squats or some jumps or some running even to get your cardiovascular workout for the day. So you just want to think about, you know, what makes sense, and make sure that you're not just pushing yourself to do more and more repetitions of things just to get that sense of like, oh, I've worked really hard, right? It's not about that as much as it is about having a very quality experience of training every day over just sheer quantity. Because your environments are so different now, it's very important that you have very clear and open lines of communication with your teachers. By that I mean, when you're in a dance studio, the teachers have already assessed that space for safety. They know that it's safe for you to jump in that space. If a studio floor is slippery on a given day, a teacher will be aware of that and will warn you. None of your teachers know your spaces except as much as they can see through the video screen. So if you have an unusually slippery floor, if you're dancing on carpet, if you are dancing on concrete, right, it's important to tell your teachers that so that they know that you're making modifications in order to dance safely. If you don't tell them, then they may wonder, or they may ask you, you know, why aren't you doing this particular step? Or why aren't you engaging in this particular combination? So it's important that you communicate with them so that they know what kinds of modifications you need to be able to do your training safely. Nobody wants to end this quarantine with an injury. So please, please, bring your smart work ethic and your communication with your teachers together so that you can, be dancing in a way that is safe and productive, and not give in to those feelings of guilt or that assumption that someone might think that you're lazy if you're not engaging in something, right? It's too important to be safe right now to indulge in those particular feelings. Which is my last point. You really want to try to limit the feelings that you have that are born of a rigid mindset, right? So guilt is a big one. A lot of dancers are feeling guilty because they can't dance the way they want to dance. And they don't want their teachers to think that they're being lazy if they're not jumping or they're not turning. If you're having those feelings, again, try to step back and ask yourself, does it make sense for me to feel guilty about something that I'm unable to do for safety reasons, right? You need to kind of be able to talk yourself through that so you can come out on the other side and say, maybe it's in your statement of purpose, I am not jumping in quarantine because it isn't good for my body. Instead, I will be using the trampoline, going for a run, whatever it is you decide is going to take the place of jumping for you, right? But when you have feelings of guilt or fear of being perceived of as lazy or not committed to your process, question those. Don't just go with it and say, oh, right, I feel so bad. Really, try to get to the bottom of that. What's going on there? Finally, we all have a primitive brain tucked away there in our, in the great recesses of our brain. And we do sometimes like to have rewards. And so if you're having difficulty getting motivated for your classes, especially on a daily basis, it can be nice to set up some kind of reward system for yourself. Some of my dancers leave their outdoor time until they've done their ballet work. Some of my dancers are, holding off on FaceTime with friends until they've done their ballet and schoolwork. So whatever kind of reward works for you, you might need to set up more of a reward system now because there aren't many variables that are changing based on our environment. Because we're in the same environment every day, all day long, there's not a lot of unexpected kind of stimulus and fun stuff going on maybe. So you may have to create some for yourself. And that's okay. It might feel a little silly, but that's okay. If you need to, set up some kind of system for yourself so that you can increase your motivation, that's perfectly fine. Just go for it. One of the things to keep in your mind is that this will pass, right? There are the best doctors and researchers and epidemiologists in the world working on creating a vaccine for COVID-19. So there will be a vaccine. There will hopefully be some kind of treatment before the vaccine. It's important to, within the way that you're thinking about this time period, to remember that at some point you will be in a dance studio again, and you will be able to continue your training. So you want to think about every day as a kind of discrete unit of time, right? Not thinking too far in the future, not worrying too much about what happened in the past, but really trying to have good days, one good day followed by another good day. Because at the end of this quarantine, lockdown, whatever you want to call it, you want to come out of this as a whole person, right? Not as a person who has lost parts of themselves in this process. So some days, the thing that brings you the most joy and the most satisfaction might be your ballet classes. And other days, they may not, right? Maybe it's finishing some academic work that you've had hanging over you, or maybe it's a really nice walk you take with your mom or a sibling, right? It's okay if dance isn't the thing that brings you the most satisfaction at the end of every single day. It's okay because, first of all, you're a whole person, and there are going to be days when you're dancing, even in the best of circumstances, isn't going to bring you all the satisfaction that you hope for. And there are days when that passion that you normally have for your dance even in the studio, doesn't show up. Like the passion just doesn't kick in for some reason, and that's normal. In this particular set of circumstances, it may be that the things that you most love about dancing are now kind of off limits to you. If you're a jumper, if you're a turner, if you're a manège person, if you love pas de deux, these are things you don't get to do right now. So, you know, you want to put into perspective that we're in a kind of holding pattern. You can get the most that you possibly can out of everything you're doing in this holding pattern, but know that, you know, it is a holding pattern and it will move on and you will come out on the other end of it. So your main job in this time period, as far as I see it, and this is just my personal opinion, but your main job is to really take very good care of yourself, which doesn't just mean physical care of your body and your dancing, but also is mental care, right? You need to take care of your mind. You need to take care of your emotional health, because you need to end every day in a way that you feel that you've accomplished something, whether that something was a great class or a homework assignment or a conversation with a friend. So I am happy to take any questions that you may have. You can go onto my website, which is easullivan.com, and there's a contact me section. And if you have any questions about any of the things that I've talked to you about today, or if you would like to ask me a question that has something to do with what we're all dealing with right now, but I maybe didn't mention, please feel free to send me an email. Mention that you watched my mental flexibility talk so that I can have some context for that. And you can tell me what school you're at. And what I'll do is I'll compile either a second video or a document where I answer all of the questions that you send to me. The other thing I want to offer you today, since you took the time to listen to this talk, is a free discovery session with me. A discovery session is a 45-minute phone call, very appropriate for social distancing, where you can spend some time telling me what your situation is right now, how you're doing, and what you might be finding challenging. It's basically a free coaching call for me to get a sense of what it is that you are finding challenging and give you maybe some help around that area. If I feel like, you know, we could work together further to support you in that area, then I'll certainly let you know at the end of the discovery session. You can book that on my website at easullivan.com, which is right on the screen, and that session is free of charge. So that is what I have for you today. I hope that you have found it helpful. I hope that there were some tips in there and some stories in there that might have resonated for you. Again, with all of the tips I've shared, please try to try them on one at a time, right? Experiment with these things to get a sense of how they work for you. Give yourself a few days or even a week or two of trying out different tips and tools to see which one is going to work best for you in the end. I'm really very appreciative for the school's the opportunity that your school gave me to share this talk with you. I hope that it was helpful, and I wish you a lot of luck in your continued online virtual training sessions. And please know that if you are looking for additional support or if you have any questions, please be in touch. I'd always be very happy to hear from you. Take care and be well.